Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a developing situation that has caught global attention after a series of Ukrainian drones struck a Russian train, triggering a chain of unexpected events that unfolded rapidly, raising questions about escalation, military tactics, supply line disruptions, and the evolving nature of drone warfare. In this video, we'll break down what happened, why it matters, and what it might mean for the future of the conflict. The story begins with a drone attack that seemed straightforward at first, but it quickly turned into something much more complex and much more significant for both sides. The incident started with a Russian military supply train moving along a key logistics route close to the front. These trains have become assets in recent months because they carry ammunition, fuel, armored vehicles, and personnel directly to the areas where Russia is pushing offensives. Ukraine, fully aware of this, has increased its focus on striking rail infrastructure, seeing it as one of the most effective ways to slow down Russian operations. The drone attack on this particular train was part of that strategy. The drones flew low, hugging terrain to avoid radar, and approached from an unexpected angle. The strike was quick, precise, and timed to hit the train at a moment when it was moving through a narrow section of track, making it almost impossible for the Russians to maneuver or defend. When the drones hit, the impact caused several train cars to derail. Flames erupted almost instantly as fuel and ammunition ignited. The explosion was large enough to be seen from kilometers away, sending dark smoke into the sky. For a moment it looked like just another tactical strike targeting Russian logistics. But then something surprising happened. Russian forces scrambled to secure the site, but instead of controlling the situation, they found themselves under additional Ukrainian drone attacks. Within minutes, secondary drones arrived, targeting responding units, vehicles, and attempts to extinguish the fire. This caught Russian troops off guard and forced them to retreat further back, leaving the burning train behind. The situation escalated faster than Russian commanders expected. The disruption didn't stop there. The attack created a domino effect that spread along the entire rail network in the region. Russian railway operators immediately halted several other trains, creating backups and logistical delays stretching dozens of kilometers. These delays meant that supplies meant for frontline troops were stuck, slowing down operations and creating shortages in fuel and ammunition during critical moments. Ukrainian officials called it one of the most effective strikes on Russian rail infrastructure in months. Russian sources, meanwhile, tried to downplay the damage but struggled to explain why multiple trains were suddenly stopped across different regions. What happened next was even more unexpected. Russian social media channels, usually tightly controlled, began circulating videos from civilians living near the area. Many filmed the flames and shockwaves from their homes, and others captured footage of Russian troops running for cover as drones continued to fly overhead. Despite attempts from Russian authorities to remove these videos, they spread quickly, revealing the scale of the disruption. What should have been a controlled narrative turned into a chaotic stream of leaks, exposing weaknesses in Russian air defenses and raising concerns among local populations about the spreading danger of drone strikes. On the Ukrainian side, military analysts praised the operation as an example of how modern warfare is shifting. Rather than relying solely on large missiles or artillery strikes, Ukraine has increasingly used swarms of inexpensive drones to overwhelm Russian defenses. These drones, though small, are capable of inflicting damage disproportionate to their cost. The strike on the train demonstrated that a series of coordinated drone attacks can cripple important infrastructure without risking pilots or expensive aircraft. This shift represents a new kind of battlefield strategy, one where mobility, speed, and precision outrank traditional brute force tactics. After the strike, Russian officials rushed to blame Ukraine using what they called terrorist methods. However, even some Russian analysts admitted privately that the reliance on exposed rail lines has become a major vulnerability. The explosion not only destroyed part of the track, it also set fire to cargo that Russia badly needed on the front. Ukrainian reports claimed the train was carrying artillery shells, fuel barrels, and several crates of drone parts intended for Russian units. While Russia did not confirm these details, the intensity of the explosion suggested that the cargo included ammunition. The situation took another interesting turn when satellite imagery from international monitoring groups began circulating. These images showed a long stretch of rail line badly damaged, with burnt train cars scattered and emergency crews struggling to contain the fire. The damage was far worse than initial Russian statements claimed. This raised questions about the actual scale of the attack. Was this just a drone strike, or were additional explosives involved? Some analysts suggested Ukraine may have used loitering munitions that circled the area before striking the exact moment the train reached the target zone. Others speculated about insider intelligence that allowed Ukraine to know the train's timing and cargo. Whatever the case, the precision was undeniable. In the hours following the strike, Russia attempted to deploy repair crews to restore the line. But here again, Ukraine executed a surprise move. Drones returned not to strike the train, but to attack the repair teams. This delayed Russia's efforts and created an environment where no one felt safe approaching the site. It forced Russian commanders to pull back even more units to defend the area, diverting resources away from the front line. These delays extended the downtime of the rail line from a few hours to more than a full day. In wartime logistics, a day-long pause can be catastrophic, especially when operations rely on steady supply. This chain of events caused renewed debate among Russian military bloggers and analysts who criticized leadership for failing to protect crucial infrastructure. They argued that Russia had been warned repeatedly about vulnerabilities in its rail system, but had done little to adapt. Some pointed out that while Russia invested billions in long-range missiles and hypersonic weapons, basic protective measures like anti-drone coverage around rail tracks were insufficient. Others questioned why trains continued transporting explosive cargo through exposed regions instead of using underground storage or armored transport, which has been suggested but rarely implemented. Meanwhile, Ukrainian commentators highlighted the psychological impact of the strike. Beyond the physical damage, the attack showed that Ukraine can hit deep into areas Russia considered relatively safe. Civilians living near the affected region expressed fear and frustration, worried that they were becoming targets because Russia stored military supplies near towns and villages. This raised concerns inside Russia about whether the conflict would continue spreading inward. The attack exposed the vulnerability of everyday infrastructure and reminded Russian citizens that the war, though portrayed as distant, was creeping closer to them. International observers watched closely, recognizing that this event represented more than just a tactical success. It showed the growing sophistication of Ukrainian drone operations and the limitations of Russian countermeasures. Some defense analysts argued that the strike could push Russia to rethink its supply strategy, possibly relying more on trucks or relocating logistics hubs farther from frontline areas. However, trucks are slower, require more fuel, and are more vulnerable to ambushes, so shifting away from rail transport would create new logistical challenges for Russia. Several hours after the strike, reports emerged that the explosion may have triggered secondary blasts from hidden munitions Russia had not declared were being transported. If true, this suggested that the train was carrying more sensitive cargo than officially acknowledged. Analysts speculated that advanced weapon components or stored explosives were part of the cargo, and the massive fireball seen in videos supported this theory. If Ukraine struck such material, it would explain why Russian authorities tried to limit public knowledge of the event. As the story developed, many asked whether this strike could signal a turning point in how Ukraine targets Russian infrastructure. In previous months, Ukraine focused mainly on ammunition depots, oil refineries, radar systems, and airfields. But attacks on rail lines are becoming more frequent, and this particular incident showed how devastating those strikes can be. The destruction of one train triggered shortages, delays, and tactical setbacks across an entire sector of the front. This ripple effect carries enormous strategic value for Ukraine, especially when trying to slow Russian offensives or weaken their supply lines before major battles. Russian forces eventually managed to push back Ukrainian drones using electronic warfare systems. These jammers disrupted drone navigation enough to reduce the frequency of strikes, allowing some repair work to begin. However, the damage was already done. By the time Russia restored partial rail service, multiple frontline units reported shortages that affected their ability to advance. This forced Russian commanders to adjust timetables and delay certain operations, giving Ukrainian forces time to regroup and fortify their positions. What makes the situation even more significant is the timing. The strike occurred during a period when Russia was trying to build momentum on the front. Interruptions to supplies during such a phase can derail entire operational plans. Ukrainian forces used this window to launch small counterattacks and reinforce weakened sectors, taking advantage of Russian delays. These counteractions may not dramatically shift the front line on their own, but strategically, they help Ukraine maintain stability while Russia struggles to regain its footing. As hours turned into a full day and then into the next, the story still wasn't finished. Local authorities in the region reported fires continuing to burn overnight, with emergency teams cycling in and out under protective cover. Drone activity also continued, though at a lower intensity than earlier. Meanwhile, the wreckage of the train remained scattered along the track, with some carriages twisted from the force of the explosions. Recovery crews faced difficulties reaching the site due to unexploded materials and the threat of further strikes. By the time calm returned, the landscape had been significantly altered, with charred earth and destroyed rail sections stretching over a long distance. Toward the end of the second day, Russian state media finally released a carefully worded statement, acknowledging that a train had been damaged but claiming that services were restored quickly. This statement contradicted independent satellite images revealed earlier, leading many to accuse Russian authorities of minimizing the truth. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials remained tight-lipped, neither confirming nor denying certain details but clearly taking credit for the operation's success. Their statements emphasized the importance of disrupting Russian supply lines and hinted at more such operations in the future. By this point, international analysts had enough information to piece together the timeline and assess the impact. They concluded that the strike was strategically significant because it forced Russia to reconsider the security of its rail network. If Ukraine continues targeting these lines, Russia will have to either invest heavily in new defensive measures or adopt riskier and less efficient alternatives. Either way, the strain on Russian logistics could grow. Analysts also noted that the strike demonstrated Ukraine's growing ability to coordinate multiple drones for maximum effect. This capability is likely to shape future operations and may influence how other nations view drone warfare. The story also sparked debates about the future of conflict in the region. Some argued that continual drone attacks will push both sides toward new forms of electronic warfare, where jamming, signal interception, and autonomous systems play critical roles. Others suggested that Ukraine's increasing reliance on drone warfare could inspire similar tactics in other conflicts around the world. Whatever the case, the strike on the Russian train served as a reminder that modern warfare is evolving rapidly and traditional defenses are struggling to keep up. As the situation began to stabilize, questions remained about the long-term consequences. Would Russia retaliate with increased intensity? Would Ukraine continue escalating its drone strikes on rail lines? How would this affect the broader conflict, especially as winter approaches and logistics become even more crucial? Analysts emphasized that supply lines are often the backbone of any military operation, and attacks on them can have ripple effects far beyond the immediate area. If Ukraine succeeds in consistently disrupting Russian logistics, it could gradually weaken Russian offensive capabilities and force them into more defensive positions. One aspect often overlooked in discussions about the strike is the human factor. Civilians living near the rail line faced frightening scenes as explosions shook their homes and drones buzzed overhead. Many expressed fear about what might come next, worried that the conflict would intensify in their region. Russian authorities attempted to reassure them, but the sheer scale of the explosion and the continuous drone activity made it clear that the area could see similar incidents in the future. This added a new layer of tension for communities already anxious about the spreading war. As we look ahead, the strike on the Russian train stands as a significant moment in the conflict, not just for the destruction it caused, but for the message it sent. Ukraine demonstrated that it could penetrate deep into Russian territory, hit high-value targets, and sustain pressure long enough to cause meaningful disruption. Russia, meanwhile, was forced to confront the reality that its infrastructure is vulnerable despite its extensive military resources. This realization may shape Russian strategy going forward, and leaders may face pressure to adapt quickly to counter future threats. In summary, the Ukrainian drone strike on the Russian train was more than a single explosive event. It was a demonstration of evolving tactics, strategic disruption, and the growing role of drones in modern warfare. It highlighted vulnerabilities in Russian logistics, created ripple effects across an entire network of supply lines, and exposed weaknesses in response strategies. It also sparked debates about the future of warfare and raised concerns among civilians caught in the crossfire. The incident will likely influence both Ukrainian and Russian strategies in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates as this story continues to evolve.